my name's Gillian Larson, and what I do is I ride long distance trails in the backcountry of the United States with my horses. I'm based on the central coast of California in a little town called Arroyo Grande. I just moved here a couple weeks ago up from the LA area, which is about 3 hours south of where I've moved to now on the central coast.
Tell me a little bit more about your childhood. Did you grow up with horses? Did you come from a horsey family?
I did. I came from half of a horsey family. My mom was the horse person in our family going into this. She's really the only kind of horse person in my entire family. So luckily she pioneered the way for me. But yes, she was into dressage, which is, a realm of horse competition. And so she was always showing and training for shows. And that's how I got into it, was when she would have a lesson with her trainer. She had a little Shetland pony that she leased for me to basically, toot around on and just have fun with. And so she would plop me on the pony for the hour-long duration that she would have the coaching session with her trainer. And I would just be allowed to have free rein and just explore as I pleased within, the property of the horse facility that all these horses were at. And it was a very big facility. So for a 4-year-old child, this was, more space than I would even know what to do with. So it was, my first real taste of freedom and being able to just have that freedom associated with riding around on a horse, or in this case, pony. But that was definitely what kind of lit the spark and kept me on that track rather than totally following in my mom's footsteps and going into horse showing. I've never done any horse competition in my entire life. I've always, from the very start, been, much more interested in going out and exploring new places on horseback.
When you were a little girl, do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up? Did you know that you wanted to sort of be with horses and work with horses? What did you dream about doing?
That's actually a great question. I guess another reason I did get into horses was because my first original passion was reptiles. I really liked reptiles. And when I was a small child, my mom would catch them for me. You can tell she's very willing to entertain my passions as a child. But my mom would catch them for me with this little noose that she'd make out of long grass. And that was just the greatest thing as a small child. So I think my first love was really reptiles. And the horses, especially what I liked to do on horses or ponies when I was a little kid, was being able to have transportation around in the outdoors was a great way for me to then be able to look for reptiles. And so that was probably my initial passion, was the reptiles. And I really wanted to almost be like Steve Irwin, when I was a kid. That was my idol growing up. And so I wanted to be a zookeeper, I wanted to go work at Australia Zoo, the whole 9 yards. I wanted to be a little, mini Steve Irwin was my first dreams as a child.
When did you start going on through rides with horses? Do you remember sort of your first sort of multi-day horse riding adventure sort of out in the wilderness?
I do. My first ever overnight with the horses was actually my first trip from across the US on the Pacific Crest Trail. So I did absolutely zero pre-prep trips before I just dove in quite literally to the deep end. And that was not entirely from me trying to not set myself up for success. I had a horse, my main horse at the time. She had severed a ligament torn a ligament the year before we set off on this trip, and her recovery took a lot longer than I expected. And so she only got the all clear from vets about 3 or 4 weeks before we needed to get on the trail. And so I was basically just focused on, conditioning her very gradually and trying to get her physically up to par with what we needed to do. And then the whole time prior to her getting the all clear, I was just going through this, small crisis of, oh my goodness, am I even going to have 2 horses for this trip? Am I only going to have 1 horse? Do I buy stuff for 2 horses? Do I buy stuff for 1 horse? It was such a mess that I never did a prep trip at all before I just dove head first into it. I remember setting up, a couple things in the backyard, like a high line, which is what I used to put my horses up at nighttime, like it's a rope between two trees. Then I remember setting that up in the backyard, and I don't even think I tied the horses off to it. I just wanted to see how I set up the high line itself between the two trees. And I remember doing that in the backyard and doing it once and looking at it and being like, okay, got it. That doesn't look too bad. And I just kind of learned as I went once I was out there. I definitely didn't have the world's prettiest knot system when I first got going. That got developed and polished as I went. I just at least had the general gist of what it was supposed to look like when I was in my backyard. But that was really it. I remember even my mom set up the tent for me in the backyard. I'd at least slept in tents before. I remember she set that up in the backyard for me one afternoon because I was too busy to do it myself. And I popped around the corner and looked at it and was like, okay, got it. It's supposed to look like that. I'll keep that in mind when I'm out there. It was incredibly, I'm sure, from an outside perspective, just like naive and probably a little arrogant, just to be that, just hoping for the best kind of thing. And yeah, I did get lucky. I got very lucky that I felt able to be adaptable once I was out there.
What was it about the Pacific Crest Trail? Why did you want to thru-ride it?
It was the only one that I even knew about at the time. I was hiking with my mom on a little 3-day trip. Can't officially call it backpacking because what we were doing was hiking up to a camp where they would basically, provide a bed and feed us. So all we were carrying with us in our packs was extra clothes. So I can't call it backpacking, but that was kind of the extent of my backcountry experience up until I decided to ride the Pacific Crest Trail. And so again, very minimal, had never slept outside, from backpacking, just done car camping. And so we're walking out there, me and my mom, to this High Sierra camp. And she mentions that she read an article in the LA Times about a woman who set the speed record for hiking Pacific Crest Trail. And that was the very first time that I'd ever even heard of the existence of such a thing. Never had heard about long distance trails. I'm really quite a bit frustrated for my parents for not having mentioned it earlier. Especially my dad, he was into backpacking and he knew of the Pacific Crest Trail. And I felt no one had ever mentioned this to me. But so the moment I heard about it from my mom talking about this woman who set the hiking record, for walking the trail, that was just like that light bulb, truly a cartoonish light bulb moment going off over my head. And just, I'm kind of quiet. I just, she's telling me about this woman. And then I'm asking some questions like, what do you mean? There's a trail from Mexico to Canada, at least the border of Mexico to the border of Canada. And she starts explaining it and I'm asking some questions it's like an actual trail. And she's like, yeah, it's, we were in the Sierras and she's like, it might even be pretty close to us. And it was kind of on the other side of the Sierra, but it was just like that just moment of oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. And I remember telling my mom probably within a couple hours of her telling me the story that, if the trail's open to horses, because we didn't even know if it was open to horses. I was like, if the trail's open to horses, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing that trail next summer. This was in August of 2013 that she and I are having this conversation. And I was like, I'm going to do it in 2014. And so, yeah, I think it would have been 8 months later, it did get onto the trail. I had graduated from undergrad in December of 2013. So just a couple months after me and my mom were having that conversation, I graduated from undergrad and I had, a gap until the end of August when I was then going to start grad school. And so I had been looking and thinking about what I was going to do with that time between undergrad and grad school. And just when I heard that, it just was like, that's it. That's what we're doing. That's how I'm going to spend my 8 months of freedom, because I'm going to ride that trail.
What did you study for undergrad and what were you doing at grad school?
I was still very much into the reptiles at this point. And so I was studying biology with a focus on herpetology, which is reptiles. And I was going to grad school for ecology and evolution with a focus on basically my study subjects being reptiles. So this was very much still kind of the driving force in my life was reptiles and studying them. And that was still predominantly the focus and the horses were the hobby.
I've spoken to quite a few people who have through hike the Pacific Crest Trail, from people like for example, like Cheryl Strayed, who wrote the book Wild. And but I've never spoken to somebody who's, through ridden it on a horse. And I'd love for you to share just maybe like, what are some of the challenges of doing it with animals? Like, how does it even work? Do you need specific permits? You mentioned about, was it one horse you needed or two horses? Like, how does it work with resupply and camping? Like, how does it work? How do you make it work?
That's definitely a very loaded question, very complicated. And then, it's not surprising that you haven't talked to someone who's done it, because people just don't do it. People do not through ride. It's I think there's there's at least a few attempts every year, but the success rate of through riding is much lower than through hiking. And then you only probably have, I think the most people I've heard of attempting in a single year is 3. It's like 3 separate individuals, like not in one group, but 3 separate individuals attempting a through ride. So it's very, very small. On some of the shorter trails, you'll get more people that do it, like the Colorado Trail, which is 500 miles long. You'll have, more attempts on that trail and a much higher success rate on that trail. But it's very hard to keep, horses well fed and keep good weight on them in the desert. And for the duration of something that's, several thousand miles long, it's very hard. So the success rate is just like, it's awful. It's an awful success rate. So it's not common because of that. And then also it's a, much larger financial commitment than hiking, because you have to, the gear, all the gear, because you need all the same gear as a backpacker, for yourself. And then you have to have all the gear for the horses. And so it gets to be definitely expensive. And part of the resupplying for horses, at least in my opinion, there's definitely been people who have done it differently than I have. But I think that the most kind of definitely the most reliable form of resupplying, but the most that would the word is eluding me, but like that would kind of guarantee the success of your ride is providing your own resupply through like a vehicle support. And so you also then have to have the expenses of gas, of tires, of the maintenance on the vehicle, because I guarantee you it'll break down at least once or twice per vehicle. And I tend to bring 2 trucks and 2 trailers with me, because I have to do this like leapfrog thing, which I'll explain in a moment, to resupply. So I'm have to afford 2 trucks, 2 trailers, plus the horses, plus all my gear. And so the financial investment that it takes to do a long distance ride is very high. So that tends to also, unfortunately, make it less doable for a lot of people compared to hiking. So yes, you have a very small pool of people who actually undertake it, and then even smaller pool of people who successfully do it. So there's not too many people who are out there trying to ride long distance. And then the logistics of it are, again, also much more complicated than hiking. So this usually, once people kind of like hear about the logistics involved, either they decide that's too much, I don't want to do it, I'm going to do it more in a simple fashion, and then they fail. Or they, just get overwhelmed by the complexities of it and decide, that doesn't sound too fun. I don't think I'm going to. So some of the like big complexities with like long distance riding are snow. You can't, tackle snow the same way that you do with, with like walking. You can put your micro spikes on and you can keep trucking on. You can't do that with a horse. You have to wait for the snow to pretty much all melt, like at least 98, 99% like melted off. You can do a couple little snow fields here and there if they are in safe areas, but for the most part, no snow, you have to wait. You have to wait for the snow to melt. So that becomes a very like logistical time issue of timing when you are hitting these high elevation places that have snow over the winter, and when does it melt, and how does that vary from year to year depending on how much snow has fallen. So that's a big obstacle and completely drives the timeline of your ride is the snow. And then the second obstacle that I've kind of touched on lightly is the resupplying, and how are you going to, manage to keep your horse well fed? Because, unlike with a hiker who can carry a lot of food on their back and live solely off of the food that they're carrying, because you can basically, as a human, you can eat these really calorie dense foods. And you can make that work. Horses don't quite have that same option just with how their digestive system is they need roughage. They need quantity of food over quality of food. And so you can't just give them an entirely calorie dense diet. They have to have roughage. They have to have a large amount of food. And so that becomes difficult because you can't necessarily carry all of it. So you have to carry some and give them some calorie dense food, but then you also have to find food. And that becomes quite tricky in places like the desert, where there's not a lot of grazing, or even in the high Sierra, where there's a lot of grazing regulations, depending on what time of year you're going through. So it becomes quite complicated in terms of how are you going to feed your horse. So some of the resupply strategies that at least, I've entertained or have heard of is the most popular one is to have at least as if you're using a vehicle to resupply, is to have a dedicated support person. So someone who drives the vehicle and that's their shtick. And they meet the horseback rider anywhere from every day when it's possible to, once a week. And so you basically, have someone that meets you and gives you and your horse, the supplies as you need it. And it's also very handy to have a vehicle so that you can get off trail to rest locations, because there's not necessarily a lot of amenities on the trail itself. And again, with a horse, you can't hitchhike to, no one's going to pick you and your horse up and take you to town. And so that would become quite a burden, to not have a way to transport your horse. So that's also a wonderful part about having a vehicle and a trailer on the trail, is you can then, get into town, go places to have a rest day, that kind of thing. So option one is support from another person. Option number two would be one truck and one trailer, and you are supporting yourself. And this is definitely the hardest way to do it, with one truck and trailer and supporting yourself, because it would mean that when you ride for 5 days, let's say hypothetically, and you want to ride for 5 days. So you would have to drive first to the place you want to start from, unload the horse or horses and leave them somehow safely at that location. And then you'd have to jump in your truck and empty trailer and drive to where you want to end the trail and leave your truck and trailer at that trailhead. And then you have to hitchhike however far it is back to the horses, and all within, as quick of a time window as you can, because it's, incredibly anxiety inducing to just leave your horses somewhere, outside of your line of vision, especially if it's not a, very secure enclosure. You're going to worry about it. And so that's the second option, is one truck and trailer and doing it yourself, no other person. And then the third option, which as far as I know, I'm the only one who uses this option, is to have two trucks and trailers. And it takes some help to set up. So if I'm going down to the border to start, I would have my mom drive one truck and trailer. I would drive the other truck and trailer with the horses in it. We'd both go down to the border. My mom would drop off the empty truck and trailer and then hop into the truck with me. We drive to the airport. She goes home. I drive, back to the trail 100 miles or so north of where the empty truck and trailer is down on the border. And then the horses and I ride south, so ride the opposite direction to the empty trailer that's south of us. And we would ride down there, load up in that truck and trailer, the one that my mom had left, and then we would ride to mile 200. So that would be north of the trailer that I had started from, and then we ride south. So it's almost like you're doing, sections of the trail. You're divvying them up, and you're riding each section southbound, but you're doing the sections in a northbound order. So that has been my preferred technique of resupplying on the trail, because it means I can do it on my own. I don't have to, ask my mom to give up, she's a teacher. I don't have to ask her to give up teaching for the summer to, come follow me around and that kind of stuff. So that has been the three vehicle ways of supporting. Then you have their people who try, especially the early days, that was not used, was a vehicle. And people would basically just set off from the Mexican border with, with more horses typically than what I use. So they could carry more things and go a greater distance between resupplying. And then if the horses broke down on the way, they would just have to buy and sell horses as they went. Like that was more of how they did it, before the 90s on the Pacific Crest Trail, like the very, very first Thru-riders. And then back then too, the trail wasn't quite as established. And so horseback riders have historically had to spend a lot of time down on the road and not actually on the trail itself, because they had to get around the snow obstacles, and they had to be more where they could get food for their horses, which was down in the valleys and going through bigger towns, and, where there would be ranchers they could stay with. So it's definitely a different kind of history to the development of like horses being able to actually do the same trail that hikers do. Historically, it has not really been possible. And it's only been as horseback riders have gotten more ingenuitive that we've been able to finally do the same route as the hikers do. But even then, we still can't quite do it at the same time always, depending on where the snow is. We sometimes have to, like I typically ride the desert first and then go up to Northern California and ride Northern California, all while I'm waiting for the high and Sierras to melt out. And so once they're melted out, then I'll go through and ride there. So typically I have to do it, out of order a little bit, just waiting for the snow to melt. Usually I joke that June is like the telling month, because June is either the month where things become clear and snow starts to melt, and that's when you kind of like start to to make that's like the determining month. If you can't make good progress in the month of June, you're going to have trouble. And so you have to like base your plan of attack basically on where are you going to be able to ride in June. So yeah, that's kind of the long-winded, thorough, probably confusing explanation of the logistical challenges of through riding.
It's fascinating. And I think one of the words that you used was anxiety. Like I can feel my stress levels rising. Like just trying to think of the logistics of planning it all and just figuring it all out. And also like, having to leave your horses while you do, driving the cars to the other end. And I suppose the other thing I'd love to ask you about is having the horses on the trail and the other animals out there, such as bears and stuff. Is that a problem? Is that something that you're concerned about? Do the horses scare the bears away, or are the bears attracted to the horses? What's it like, sort of out there riding with your animals out on the trail with the other wildlife?
For the most part, the other wildlife does clear out with the horses coming through, especially bears. Horses are quite a bit bigger than bears, especially the bears that you have on the Pacific Crest Trail, for instance, which are black bears. Horses are much larger. So most bears do clear out. I've only ever had one bear who had obviously figured out that typically, because it was in the Sierra, that the outfitters in the Sierra obviously have like the good food. Because that bear, I was camped near some backpackers, and there was one bear in all my years of doing this that, definitely like had picked me out as being the person whose camp he was going to raid. And he kept, circling around and trying to come into the camp. And thankfully, he wasn't aggressive in any means. He was just like that typical, picnic basket bear who's just like, come on, man, just, why you got to be like this? Why can't you share with me? And so I was able to keep him out of camp by just being, frightening and aggressive. But yeah, he was obviously, was choosing me over all the backpackers that were camped around me. He was picking my campsite. And I'm sure it's because a lot of outfitters, like professional horse packers, they have a lot of animals and they bring along a lot of nice food and cooking supplies. And so he had figured that out, that bear in particular. But otherwise, aside from that one bear, other bears and other wildlife are definitely intimidated by the size of horses and tend to give you a wide berth. And so normally all you see is, a little brown furry butt, running away through the trees. That's typically all I get to see of bears.
Tell me about your horses. Like, I mean, obviously you've done the Pacific Crest Trail twice in 2014, 2016. You've done the Colorado Trail, the Arizona Trail, the Continental Divide Trail. It must be this amazing sort of bonding experience and this yeah, this incredible thing that you do together. They are your teammates. Could you share a little bit more what the horses are called, what breed they are, what's their temperament like, what's their personality like?
Yeah, all those trips that you just listed off were all done with my horses, Shyla and Dakota, who my mom purchased Shyla for me when I was 13 years old. And then we bred her, and she gave birth to my other horse, Dakota, when I was 15 years old. And so I had them for a very long time. Shyla only recently passed away in the summer of 2019. And so, but all those trails, all my like long distance trails have been done with her. And so since losing her, I've then been spending the last year or so kind of basically, I guess, doing interviews for another horse, doing a lot of, horse shopping, going out and buying new horses. And I tend to have a bit of a bleeding heart. And so I've acquired both some good horses and also some, kind of just like, well, welcome to the family, kind of horses. So I will probably skip those interviews because they haven't really done anything yet. They're very much all in the training process, and it would just be confusing if I were to introduce 5 more equines. But yeah, Shyla and Dakota were the ones who I accomplished everything on, and they were, mother and son, and definitely, especially Shyla, was just I don't know how I got so lucky to have a horse like her, like with her athleticism. It was out of this world. For anyone that like somewhat knowledge about horse racing, we have in the US, the Triple Crown, which is like 3 really big horse races, and very seldomly does a horse win all 3 races. Like it's very rare. And I consider Shyla to basically be on par with one of those horses in terms of like her just like very unique athletic ability. Yeah, she was just an absolute monster of a horse when it came to being able to just like cover country, and just had so much heart and so much endurance and was so brave and sure-footed. And it was just, yeah, I absolutely lucked out. And so when I did zero prep for my initial ride, the only reason I made it through the Pacific Crest Trail, I believe, the first time, and probably the second time too, was because I had such a, like unicorn of an athletic horse who could just, seemingly just never break down. She was just unstoppable of a horse. And she kind of allowed me to have the ability to learn as we went, because she could, in a sense, carry the team. And quite often, for both of my Pacific Crest Trail rides, I was not a good enough partner to be able to take care of Dakota for the entire duration. Both times, I had like kind of like a standard at which I wouldn't let my horses lose weight below. And so once they would get to a certain point, like that was always what I promised, it was like, nope, that's when the trip ends. I'm not going to let them get too skinny. And so Dakota would be able to basically do about 1,000 to 1,500 miles. And then he would just kind of get to this point where it's like, I don't think that being out here is any longer in your best interest. And so I would send him home, and then it would basically be me and Shyla for the last 1,000 to 1,500 miles of the trail. Would be just me and her. And so I had to be a bit strategic about like what parts I was going to do with 2 horses and then what parts I was going to do with 1. But yeah, so Shyla was remarkable. And so for the first 2 years, it was especially a lot of just me and her accomplishing things together. And then something, after the second, Pacific Crest Trail ride, it's like I finally understood. I finally got like my craft down to like a science. And that's when I finally became a good enough partner to kind of like make it work with other horses, I guess, and not just a unicorn. And so that's when then Dakota started really thriving out there. Was after 2016, I had a good system down. And now with the other horses that I've brought into my life, they aren't necessarily unicorns, but we're able to be, a good team because I'm finally, pulling my weight, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, they both sound incredible. And I'm sorry for your loss of Shyla, but what incredible memories that you must have together. And now this could be a really stupid question. So I don't ride horses, but I have hiked the Appalachian Trail. So I know what it's like to get like hiker's legs, and it's, you're sore and you're tired. With horse riding, is that the same thing? Like, does it hurt from like riding on a horse for like 8 or 10 hours? I don't know. Is it like easy to do? Because I'm like, part of me is like, well, you sat down all day, so how hard can it be? But I could be completely wrong.
I guess the lucky part, yeah, with horses is you can get off the horse, and so I typically walk, like 30% of the time, I would guess, and so yeah, I kind of decide to get off based on like how sore my knees or if my butt's gone numb, more or less. It's like, okay, time to like get off and like get some blood flow going back to my lower extremities. And so, yeah, so I think being able to do both, being able to get off and walk when you want to. And then when, you start going up a steep hill, it's like, okay, I'm going to climb back aboard. It definitely is, that's very easy. That's not hard on your body. In my opinion, that's not too bad, especially if you have a comfortable saddle. I definitely did have a lot more pain, especially being a woman down in that area on my first ride, just with how like my saddle was apparently like shaped. It just tended to like aggravate me as a lady, and so once I got a better saddle for me, I did not have that problem anymore. So yes, depending on what your equipment is, you might have more discomfort. but yeah, with the right equipment, because you can get on and off the horse, you will feel, it's not like hiking where you have no choice. You have to put those shoes on, no matter how many blisters you have. You have to walk up that hill, no matter how tired your legs are. You definitely have more leeway as a rider when it comes to that.
Yeah, it sounds so idyllic and relaxing.
Yeah. And it can be. I usually joke that that like through riding is kind of on like this it's like on this like rate of extremes in a sense. And so on a good day, it's very easy. It's very straightforward. You basically pack up camp, you get on the horse, you walk some, you ride some, you get to your camp at the end of the day, like ta-da, very easy, easier than what the hikers go through for sure, who are, like hiking 30 of those miles. But then you also have days where there might be hundreds of blowdowns in the trail, or there might be, these big snow fields, or, some other, legitimate, like actual physical obstacle in the trail. And you might spend hours and hours and hours just, trying to accomplish 1 mile of trail, trying to get the horses through it. And so on those days, I do think that the horseback riders have it worse than, the hikers. I can't even tell you how many times like I've had absolute noodle arms, or I remember one time in Washington, basically feeling, as though like I had trench foot because it had been raining so bad and I had been walking so much of the day and having to scale up and down hillsides to make paths for the horse. And just like, it was just a day, and, got to camp and like couldn't walk anymore. It was just absolutely could not. And, had to the next day scale through like avalanche areas, like avalanches that had come through and just absolutely wiped out every single tree in the area. And it was just like, oh my God, like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. You just like come down the trail and there's just kind of like this like 5-foot wall of like dirt and rock and like fallen trees in front of you. And you're like, where'd the trail go? And so I do think in those moments that it's harder. You have ideally not too many days that are that bad. But especially on my first ride from Mexico to Canada, it felt like I had a lot of those kinds of days where it was just like everything was just going so wrong. But yeah, so I usually think that like, hiking is like at a consistent like 6 to 7, depending on, elevation you're doing on like the difficulty scale. And horseback riding goes anywhere from like a 2 to a 10 on the difficulty scale, depending on just like what Mother Nature is throwing at you in terms of obstacles.
So roughly how many miles would you be doing per day? And how long do most of your through hikes take you? Through rides take you, not hikes, through rides.
Oh, yeah. Even I didn't catch that there. Typically a through ride will take us about, we average usually 25 miles a day. And then I usually give them at least, 2 days off a week. So typically, if you count in like our rest days, we're averaging about 20, anywhere like 17 to 20 miles a day for the whole journey, which is pretty comparative to like a moderate hiker's pace. We aren't the slowest, out there compared to the hikers, but we absolutely aren't the fastest either. And a lot of that is because of the rest days. a horse, when I'm picking out mileage, because a lot of it's dependent on like where the campsites are, like that's how you decide where you're going, and how many miles you're doing. But I'll try to hit at least 20 miles per day. And we'll go up to a really long day will be, like 36 miles would be a very long day. I try to not go over 30 if I can help it, because those just become grueling days. And if you have obstacles that day, like you're absolutely going to be arriving in camp, like in the dark, which I do a lot, especially on that first ride from Mexico to Canada. I mean, I think I could probably count on one hand the number of times I got into camp when it was light out. I was just consistently arriving into camp, 10, 11, 12 in the middle of the night, just, rolling through. I'm sure I went through, thankfully the trail wasn't as popular in 2014, or I would have probably been walking through a lot of backpackers camps in the middle of the night in the darkness and scaring the absolute bejesus. There'd be like this like legend of, hikers talking about being in their tent and then hearing this rustling in the bushes and like the ground shaking as some monster like went past their tent, and they would be like, oh no, that was me. Sorry. So that's definitely, 20 to 30 miles is like the sweet spot. That's what I try to hit. But we can do up to mid 30s without it being horrendous. And I think the longest day I've ever done has been like 42, 43 miles, something about that. And did not enjoy that. It was not an ideal choice by any means. I'd gotten sick and I was trying to like make up time after being having food poisoning in like a trail town. And so, yeah, once in a while we can like absolutely just kill ourselves and do 40 something miles.
I'd love for you maybe just to share like a couple of those magical moments that just really stand out for whatever reason that may be, that have just been an incredible highlight for you.
Ooh, good question. Definitely, I think, one of those just kind of like more like magical moments, in Mother Nature, where you just kind of are like just at awe of what is happening around you and just how beautiful it is. I think for me was, probably like that biggest moment was Knife's Edge in Washington. Like I'd done it in 2014 and it was beautiful. There was some fires going on in Washington at the time, so it was a little hazy, but it was pretty. It was pretty. But yeah, it didn't like necessarily blow my mind. There was a big snow field along where the horses go, which is along like, what is that glacier called? Like Packers Glacier or something. It's, it goes, below where some of the hikers go, like up over Old Snowy. And so I remember in 2014 doing the snow route and just being just on cloud nine that we didn't die crossing like basically a glacier. And I remember that from 2014, but when I did it again in 2016, the day had been very cloudy and overcast, and it just, was, even less pretty than 2014, on our whole way out there. And then like right when we were on, the spine of Knife's Edge, it was very socked in with clouds and very low visibility, but at least it was kind of like mystical. So, I was enjoying it. I liked it more. And then all of a sudden it was like all the clouds just were like basically dropping down into the valley. And so all of a sudden, as we're on Knife's Edge on the spine, the clouds just like, clear out. And it almost felt like you were on an island, because all the clouds were below you. And so you were on this island of like, Old Snowy and Knife's Edge, and then all clouds, like all the way to Mount Rainier, Rainier. And that was all you could see. It was just like clouds and Mount Rainier, and the sun was like so shining, so bright. And it was such a blue sky once you were above the clouds. It was just like, I think I probably started crying. Like it was just so beautiful and just felt like so otherworldly. So that was for me like the prettiest moment on trail. And then I think, yeah, in the sense, I don't know what it is about Washington, but I just tend to have, it feels like just moments in Washington of like pure euphoria, either euphoria from getting through what felt like an endless, impossible obstacle. And I finally get to the other side and it's just like, oh my God, it's just so beautiful. We're alive. I've had several of those in Washington. So I seem to have just like kind of like a euphoric, feelings towards Washington, yet also, dread, because I know how hard Washington is. And then, yeah, some other places. I really loved Glacier National Park. That was a really spectacular place to finish on the Continental Divide Trail. That was really stunning. Yeah, it's just there's places out there, Colorado too, where you just kind of look around and you're like, this can't be planet Earth. Like, how is it possible that it's this beautiful? Yeah, and I definitely love those moments. Those definitely stick out to me in my head. And I also really like camp life. Like being in the camp with the horses. I just enjoy, listening to my audiobooks, eating my dehydrated food, and just, being there with the horses. And it's this very, sense of just like gratitude in a sense when you make it to camp and everyone's safe. And yeah, you just this overwhelming sense of just gratitude and contentment that I'll have at the end of the day, as long as it wasn't a super hard day. Yeah, I do love those moments on all my trips. It's just, that sense of just like contentment with where you're at.
Can you snuggle with the horses? Because so one of the things that I'm not a massive fan of is being cold. And so just the thought of just, having these incredible, amazing animals, I'm just thinking, would you snuggle with them? Like, around the campfire if you were a little bit cold? Like, is that a thing you do, or is it not really a thing you do?
Most of them tend to stand most of the time. And so unless you are, like willing to stand as well, it could be hard to snuggle them because they won't necessarily come down to your level, at least in that same way. Or if they do want to snuggle, they're usually only going to snuggle with you if you are like providing scratches. So like I have a mule and she will basically plop her head into your lap. So you can cuddle her head very easily, but you have to pay the price of like consistent, scratches, or, she's not going to physically be touching you. Horses tend to not necessarily be full body touching, all the time. They'll do it to, like get a scratch or that kind of thing. But for the most part, their way of showing like companionship is just to like hover near you. And so yeah, there's not usually, unless it's for like brief moments, a lot of necessarily like full on physical cuddling kind of contact. It's much more just like in their sharing space is more how you cuddle with horses. That would be very useful for sharing body warmth with.
Do they sleep standing up?
They can rest definitely standing up. They can't get REM sleep unless they lay down. And so horses will usually lay down for like 2 to 4 hours over a 24-hour period to get their REM sleep. And they'll usually be down for like when they're REM sleeping for, like half an hour would be about as long as they would be down for typically. So they do lay down periodically for short periods of time in order to, get that REM sleep. And, especially when they're camping outside your tent, like you can hear them kind of dreaming. I have several horses who nicker in their sleep, and their ears will twitch and stuff. And yeah, there's been a couple times where, because especially Shyla, my horse, she would nicker if she needed something, like if, she was thirsty or whatever when we were on trail. And so that was kind of like my wake up call, was to like pop out of the tent if she nickered in the middle of the night. And there was definitely multiple false alarms of, her nickering and me like busting out of my tent, super quick, thinking that maybe she, was in trouble and she was just passed out and dreaming about something and nickering in her sleep. So yeah, they do lay down, but it's, not as common as it would be for many other animals.
You've got a blog and you've got a website, pacificcrestquest.org, and I know that you share a lot of your journeys on Instagram as well. Is through riding now sort of a full-time occupation for you? Is that how you earn your living?
Oh, I wish. No, it's not. It's so far, it's definitely still a one-way financial transaction of me giving money to Thru-riding and Thru-riding not giving money to me. At least, yeah, that's somewhat true. It's not entirely true. I do now start holding little workshops, and I want to do that more and offer more of those. And so I'm hoping that like my expertise in being able to share those with other people who want to get out there with horses will start to kind of like return some income. And with Instagram, I don't get much money. I have like one sponsor who I do get paid posts for. And then I get free gear for horses from another sponsor. So I do get to like get some income in that sense from that. But for the most part, just doing lots of, like hikers, a lot of like side hustles, just to work really hard in the off season, to make the money for it. I have done egg donating has been a big source of funding my, once I started doing the trips every summer. It's because I started donating my eggs and getting financially compensated for that. And that being a very, quick way to have like large financial turnover. So that has been how I have recently funded it, but they cut you off when you hit 30. So I'm in my final year of being able to use this as a financial income, which is why I have gone back to grad school this year because I like teaching. I did discover that when I was a biology major and was, still studying primarily reptiles. So I did discover through that experience that I liked teaching. I did decide that biology was I was probably never going to be more than a mediocre biologist. And so I decided I didn't like being mediocre. And so stepped back from that. And now that I'm turning 29 soon, I'm going back to grad school to study agricultural education so I can get a master's degree so that I can hopefully get a job at either a community college would probably be my preference. And then, kind of follow into my mom's footsteps in that sense. She's a community college teacher. And hopefully that will become my newish primary incomes. But I think for quite a while, for several years now, and probably for the next 5 at least years, I'm guessing that my primary income source is going to be from like just finding little side hustles, like wherever possible.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's really that's fascinating. Like, wow. Like
I think it is. And I think at least most podcast people and people who are listening to this podcast will approach that with like the right frame of mind. It's not something that I like, throw out there on Instagram because I know I have, quite a, within the depths of the internet, you don't quite know what the people are going to be like. And I know there's some people who are very conservative and who might find that strange or whatever. But I don't know if I want my own kids. And so it seemed, not too much of a burden, at least for me, to be like, help other people have kids. And in exchange, they help me basically get to do what my dreams are, which is like doing these trips. So it's kind of been, like, I'll help you get your dream. You help me get my dream kind of, way of, funding it. And it's been really rewarding. I have not had a single bad experience with egg donating, but I know it's uncommon. I definitely always tell hikers when they ask, like, how do you afford this? When they see me, especially because I sometimes run into hikers, from years to years. And they see the truck and they see the trailer and they're just like, this cannot be cheap. But yeah, so I always tell the hikers, and so far I've yet to ever have a hiker tell me, oh yeah, that's how I fund my hikes too. They're always just like, darn it, why hadn't I thought of that sooner? Or for the guys, they're like, dang, like that is the one area that, I will not get more money than a woman in is egg donating. Nope, can't tap that market. It's kind of exclusively a female market.
Talking about your dreams, you've hiked. You have ridden on some of the incredible trails throughout America. What else is on your wish list? Where else do you want to go and ride horses?
Oh, that's a great question. I want to do the Pacific Crest Trail again, just because I think I have, it's almost like a first love. You just have an unusual like affection for it. And so it's been a while since I did the Pacific Crest Trail. So I'm hoping maybe to do that in like 2022. My equine team, since losing Shyla it's starting to get there. It's starting to improve their training and everything. So I'm hoping we'll be ready by 2022. I would really like to, the Highlands of Scotland have looked very enticing. And I know that's not like an incredibly long trek, but it would take at least some decent planning to figure out, getting over there, buying a horse and trekking around the Highlands in Scotland for like a month. That would be a really big dream that I would like to someday tick off. Patagonia down in Argentina is another really beautiful area that I would like to see. I don't know how much trekking I could do in terms of like a long distance ride. I haven't investigated it, but obviously that would be a real dream. My mom is retiring next year from teaching. And that is uber exciting to me because then it means that she could, function as like a full-time support person because, she's always helped me whenever she could. And she's been a wonderful support team. But it's definitely, kind of limited me being able to leave the US for some of my trips because, if I do need help, I need 2 trucks and trailers, and there's just no way that I'm going to be able to afford, buying new trucks and trailers in another country and horses and all that stuff. And so it's kind of kept me in the States. And so once my mom, retires, then we might have like kind of, between the two of us, we might really have a whole new level of our, A game that we can reach in terms of being able to like pull off some of these big trips. So yeah, so Argentina and Scotland, those are so far the ones that are, internationally at the forefront of my brain.
Where's the best place for people to follow along with your journeys and your adventures? Where would you send them to online?
Definitely the most current and the one I keep the most up to date is Instagram. And my Instagram handle is Thru_rider, RIDER. So my handle, Instagram Rider. That's definitely where the most up to date one is. And then for a lot of like my website, where to contact me, and then especially for the blog that I basically, unfortunately, kind of fell off the wagon of keeping up to date on it around the very end of my Continental Divide Trail. And that was kind of because Instagram started to kind of take off and be the more primary connection for me with the outside world, or the internet world. And so, everything from like 2014 up until, the very end of like the Continental Divide Trail. So all my really big trips, all my really big accomplishments, those are well documented on my website. It has my blog, which is pacificcrestquest.org. And then I have another website that that's more user-friendly, that I'm trying to eventually update and move all the blog stuff over onto. Because when I made this first blog, I never thought I was going to do multiple rides. So it's become, a little bit messy. And so I'm trying to like reorganize everything. And that will be at Gillian-Larson.net. You can tell that I've not used this website much, so just put it up. If you Google my name, Gillian Larson, the stuff will pop up. That's at least helpful. If you Google that, you will find the websites. They will appear. And then on Instagram, it's Thru-rider.
Love it. And Gillian, I'd love for you to leave our listeners with final words of advice, final words of wisdom from what you've learned from riding over 10,000 miles from Mexico to Canada 3 times. What advice would you share for the women out there who want to get outside their comfort zone and do something a little bit different? What would you say to them?
I think that I would say to not let your fear of outside circumstances like stop you from trying it. I feel that, women especially grow up in this kind of like realm of being told to be hyper vigilant and aware and in a sense, very cautious and kind of afraid. Like they have to be constantly afraid of what's going to happen to them. And I think it stifles a lot of adventurists from being able to get out there. And at least in my experiences, there's been nothing but amazing people that I've run into in the backcountry. It's the modern world that tends to be a little bit more like intimidating to me. But yeah, out there, it is a place where you are free and where you can be treated as an equal. Like Mother Nature doesn't discriminate. She will set the same challenges for you as for everyone else. And yeah, don't be intimidated to be alone, to be out there, to be a female, to think that you need to be hyper vigilant. At least in my experience, it's like the one place where you can kind of like let your guard down. So that would be my main advice, would be just, don't let your fear of, the boogeyman and all these scary things that you think might happen stop you from getting out there, because it is going to be much better than what those fear voices are saying in the back of your head.
Absolutely. Gillian, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast to share more about your incredible journeys and your passion for thru riding. It's been absolutely inspiring.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I was very glad to participate.
Hey tribe, how you doing? I hope you enjoyed the episode with Gillian. My name is Sarah Williams. I'm the host of the Tough Girl podcast and the founder of Tough Girl Challenges, which is all about motivating and inspiring you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media. I bet you cannot believe it. How is it almost the end of 2020? So it's going to be Christmas tomorrow. So this episode has come out on the 24th of December. So I just want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and hope you have a wonderful day. So we've got 2 episodes to go before the end of the year, and next week on the 29th of December, we're going to be speaking with Alison Walker, who is a phenomenal ultra runner. So Alison is a UK-based Malaysian ultra runner, and she's only basically taken up running in the past sort of 2 years, but she's going to be sharing more about her ultra running journey, running 100 miles, what her training is like, and she's also going to be sharing more about one of the most recent challenges that she's done, which is called the Smog Graham Round. So many people will probably have heard of the Bob Graham Round, which is a well-known endurance challenge which happens in the Lake District. Basically, runners go out and attempt to run over 42 mountain peaks within a 24-hour time period. The Smog Graham Round is actually a circumnavigation of all the peaks in each London borough. So there's 32 boroughs, and it's 297 kilometres route. The route is about 50% off-road, and it takes in parts of the London Loop and the Capital Ring as well. So yeah, really, really interesting and awesome conversation, especially around her training and her attitude to running. Really, really fascinating. After that, we are going to be speaking with Cara and Jen, who are going to be sharing more about their journey to running 50 miles. So this episode comes out on the 31st of December. And again, absolutely fascinating. 2 mums who have documented their journey on the road to 50 miles, the challenges they face, why they decided to take on this challenge, and what it was like along the way. So new episodes of the Tough Girl podcast are coming out on a Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. So please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. Please do go and visit toughgirlchallenges.com, which is the website, the main central hub. On the main website, you can find more information about me, the different challenges that I've done throughout the years, as well as information about all of our previous guests. There's also a dedicated patrons and supporters page. So I just want to say a massive thank you to all of the patrons and supporters who are supporting the Tough Girl podcast. It makes such a massive difference having your financial support every single month. So we're currently around 285 patrons. So the next goal is to get to 300. So if you enjoy listening to the Tough Girl podcast, if it's inspired you, if it's motivated you, if it's encouraged you, then think about paying it forward. You can support in dollars, sterling and euros. You can support monthly, you can support annually. Whatever amount that you can afford, it really does make a massive amount of difference. So a big thank you to all of the patrons out there. I could not do this without you. But wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it. Take the first step, because you are the only person who can make the change in your life. So take the first step, do it today, take action now, and then you'll start building momentum. And that is where the magic is going to happen. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.